brass. Lonely rancher paid her to clean his barn, but when he knocked he found her raising 4 kids alone. It was a quiet morning on the edge of town, the kind of morning where the sun slowly stretched its golden fingers across the fields and everything felt calm, almost too calm. The small town itself was the kind of place that people passed through without thinking twice. There weren't many shops, just a general store, a tiny post office, and a handful of houses tucked along dusty roads. But on the outskirts, far from the town center, stood a ranch. It was a simple place, with wooden fences that had begun to lean from years of wind and rain, and a barn that had seen better days. The rancher who owned it had lived there alone for many years. His name was Henry, though most people in town just called him the rancher. He wasn't unfriendly, exactly, but he had grown used to solitude. The days had a rhythm. Feed the animals, check the fences, repair what needed repair, and return home to a house that echoed with quiet. Henry had always liked it that way, for the most part. Silence was easy to get used to when you spent years with it. But the barn was different. It was old, large, and filled with the memories of generations past. Dust hung thick in the corners, and cobwebs draped the beams like forgotten decorations. He had thought he could handle it on his own, but over time he realized it was too much. The barn had become more than just a place to store hay and tools. It was a weight on his shoulders, and Henry was tired. He wasn't a young man anymore, and no matter how strong or capable he had once been, his arms ached after a few hours of sweeping and moving heavy boxes. So, one afternoon Henry went to the general store. The store itself was small and smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. Mrs. Ben Jenkins, who ran it, was chatting with the customer when Henry walked in. He moved slowly, trying not to let his discomfort show. When he reached the counter, he cleared his throat. "I need a hand," he said quietly. "Someone to help me clean out the barn. Just a few hours a day. I'll pay. Fairly. Mrs. Beration." Jenkins raised her eyebrows. "The barn, Henry? That place has been standing for 50 years. You need someone strong." "I can't do it alone anymore," he admitted. "I'm willing to pay." "I just need someone reliable." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I know a woman who might be interested. She's quiet, hard-working, lives alone with her kids, but she's been looking for extra work. I'll give her your note." Henry thanked her and left, feeling slightly embarrassed but relieved. He didn't know what kind of woman would come, but he only hoped that she could help. The next morning a knock came at his door. When Henry opened it, he saw her standing there. She was not tall, but she carried herself with a quiet confidence. Her hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her eyes, though tired, were alert and careful. She smiled politely. "I'm here about the barn," she said. Henry nodded and stepped aside. "Come in," he said. "I appreciate you coming." She didn't ask for much. No elaborate explanations, no complaints. She just rolled up her sleeves and began to work. At first, Henry watched, unsure of what to say. The woman swept the floor with precision, moved boxes carefully, and organized the tools as if she had been doing this work for years. The barn slowly began to change. Dust clouds rose with each sweep. Sunlight streaked across the wooden walls, and the smell of hay became less musty as the space cleared. For Henry, it was strange to have another person there. He had grown so used to silence that hearing someone hum quietly while working felt almost unreal. Yet, there was something comforting about it. He found himself sneaking glances at her as she moved with quiet purpose, noticing how careful she was not to disturb anything unnecessarily, how she seemed to know instinctively where everything should go. Days turned into weeks and the routine settled into a rhythm. She would arrive early, work through the morning, and leave just as the sun climbed high into the sky. Henry paid her without fuss, though he began to look forward to seeing her each day. The barn became cleaner, more organized, almost alive again.
And yet, she said very little about herself.
Henry noticed the tiredness in her eyes, the way she sometimes rubbed her hands as if to ease a hidden ache. He thought about asking, about learning her story, but he hesitated. There was a sense of privacy around her, a careful boundary that he didn't want to overstep. Still, he felt a pull, a curiosity he couldn't ignore. Was she? What had brought her here? Why did she carry herself with such quiet determination, yet seemed so weary beneath it all? One morning the barn was nearly finished. The floor gleamed, the tools were lined neatly on shelves, and the sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating every corner. Henry stood near the doorway, watching her work, feeling a strange mix of admiration and concern. She was humming softly now, and he noticed how her shoulders moved with the rhythm of the broom. Finally, she stopped and straightened. "I think we're done for today," she said, her voice polite but gentle. Henry nodded, unsure what to say. "You've done amazing work," he admitted. "The barn hasn't looked like this in decades." "Bay," she smiled, but it was faint, almost hesitant. "Thank you. It's best. Good to see it clean." Henry felt a lump in his throat. There was something more behind that smile, something he couldn't quite place. She seemed to carry a heaviness, a story he didn't yet understand. Passed, and the routine continued. Henry found himself thinking about her more than he expected. He wondered about her mornings before she came to work, about where she lived, what her life was like outside the barn. He noticed how careful she was with everything, how she seemed to balance strength and fragility in a way that made him respect her even more. One evening, Henry realized she hadn't shown up. He waited, thinking she might be late, but as the sun began to sink behind the hills, he grew concerned. It wasn't like her to miss work. Something in his chest tightened, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Worry. Desperate, he walked to the edge of town, following the directions she had given for her home. The small house she lived in sat quietly, tucked behind overgrown shrubs. The paint was peeling, the windows slightly fogged, and the yard was uneven with patches of dirt and grass. Henry felt a pang of unease as he approached. He knocked on the door, gently at first, then more firmly. After a moment, the door opened. Henry was unprepared for what he saw. Inside, the space was small, barely enough for a family, yet it was filled with life in its own quiet way. 4 children were there, each at a different age, playing with simple toys and school books scattered across the floor. They looked up at him with curiosity and caution, eyes wide and wondering. And there she was, standing behind them, a hint of embarrassment in her posture. She looked tired, worn from the weight of her responsibilities, yet there was a quiet strength in the way she held herself. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to worry you." The kids. It's been a busy morning. Henry felt something shift in his chest. The barn work, the quiet mornings, the dusty sunlight, everything came into focus. This woman wasn't just hard-working. She was carrying a weight that most people couldn't imagine. 4 children, alone, trying to survive and give them a chance at life. And here he had been, worrying about dust and cobwebs. He stepped inside, feeling the warmth and chaos of the small home. The children watched him, unsure at first, but slowly relaxing as they realized he meant no harm. Henry realized that the barn had been more than just a chore for her. It was a way to provide, to keep her children safe, and to hold on to some small sense of stability. As he left that evening, Henry thought about everything he had seen. He thought about the resilience, the quiet courage, and the invisible burdens that people carry, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a desire to help, to be more than just a solitary rancher living among empty fields. He returned home that night with a renewed sense of purpose. The barn was no longer just a building in need of cleaning. It was a bridge, a connection to a story that was unfolding right in front of him. And he knew, deep down, that his life would never be the same again. The days ahead promised change, and Henry realized he was ready to face it, one quiet morning at a time. The next morning, Henry couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen at her house, beside of 4 children, each with their own little world of books, toys, and laughter, had stayed with him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this woman, who had worked quietly at his barn, was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. He had always thought he knew hardship, living alone with a ranch to care for. But seeing her life, he realized that resilience could take many forms, and hers was extraordinary. He decided he had to know more, not out of curiosity or gossip, but because he felt a quiet responsibility. She had been helping him, showing up every day, and he had no idea what else she had to handle. Beck. He didn't want to intrude, but he felt that if he could offer even a little support, it might make a real difference. By mid-morning, he walked toward her house, this time with a small basket of bread and fruit he had brought from his kitchen. The path was dusty, lined with wildflowers that had pushed through the dry soil, stubborn and alive. As he approached, he saw movement inside. The door opened slowly, and she appeared, brushing her hands on her apron, a little startled to see him standing there. I didn't expect you," she said, her voice careful but not unkind. "I thought you might like some breakfast for the kids," Henry said, offering the basket. "I just thought maybe it could help." Her eyes softened for a moment, and she nodded. "Thank you. That's very kind." She stepped aside, letting him in. The children peeked around the doorway, shy but curious. Their mother whispered something, and they disappeared for a moment, returning with small smiles. Henry felt a pang of warmth. These children, despite the challenges, had laughter in their eyes. They were clearly loved, even if life had been hard. He set the basket on the small kitchen table, noticing how tight the space was. Every inch was used wisely, plates stacked neatly, cups lined on the counter, a small vase with wild flowers. It wasn't much, but it was home, and it was filled with love. "I can't imagine what it must be like, managing all of you on your own," Henry said softly, unsure how else to begin. She looked down at her hands, a faint sigh escaping her lips. "It's not easy. Some days I don't know how I keep going. But I have to. They're my world." Her voice was steady, but Henry could hear the faint tremor beneath it. He nodded, not saying anything. Words seemed insufficient. Narration. Instead, he watched, noticing the way her shoulders carried tension even as she moved with care. He realized she had been protecting herself for years, showing only what was necessary to the world, never asking for help. After a few moments, he cleared his throat. I hope you don't mind me asking, but what brought you here? To this town? To this life? She looked up, meeting his gaze. There was a pause, long and thoughtful, as if weighing how much to share. Then she spoke, softly, almost as if telling a secret. Best. Life has a way of making choices for you. I lost my husband years ago. I moved from place to place, trying to find work, trying to find a safe place for my children. This town, it's small, but it's quiet. It's safe enough to let them grow, even a little. Henry felt a lump in his throat. He had expected hard stories, but there was a quiet dignity in her words, a strength that made his chest tighten. She wasn't asking for sympathy. She was just telling the truth. And the truth was enough to make him realize how much courage it took to survive each day. He listened as she continued. Some days I feel like I'm barely keeping it together. Bills, school, groceries. Sometimes I wonder if it's too much, but then I look at them and I know I can't stop. But I won't stop. They need me. Her gaze shifted to the children playing quietly in the corner, and there was a softness in her eyes, a mixture of pride and worry. Henry felt a deep respect for her. Here was a woman who had faced more challenges than most, and yet she kept moving forward every day for the sake of the children. He thought of his barn, his own lonely life, and realized how small his problems were compared to the struggles she faced quietly, without complaint. They talked for hours, though not in a hurried way. It was slow, gentle conversation, filled with small pauses, glances at the children, and the occasional smile. Henry learned their names. Lucy, the eldest, who loved to draw. Sam, who was quiet but clever. Little Emma, who never stopped moving. And Ben, the youngest, who clung to his mother's hand with fierce loyalty. Each child was different, but all of them carried the same spark of life that their mother had fought so hard to protect. Henry offered a simple suggestion, careful not to intrude. If you ever need help, not just for the barn, but anything, I can help. She looked at him, unsure if he meant it. Then, slowly, she nodded. Bet. Thank you. It's hard to ask for help sometimes. But I might take you up on that one day. It wasn't much, but it was a start. For Henry, it felt like a connection, something real and human in a world that had been quiet and empty for so long. Over the next few weeks, Henry began to visit more often, bringing small things, groceries, school supplies, tools for the house. Brain. He never stayed too long, and he never overstepped, but he made himself available. And slowly, the woman began to trust him. Pay. She started to share more of her life, telling stories of her children's little victories, the challenges she faced at school meetings, the moments that made her laugh despite the difficulties. Henry found himself feeling alive in a way he hadn't in years. The barn had been a simple task, but it had led him here, to a life that was messy, challenging, but beautiful. He began to see the world through a different lens, through the eyes of a mother fighting for her children, of children who found joy in small moments, of someone who carried courage quietly and without recognition. One afternoon, as they were cleaning the barn together, she paused and looked at him. "You know, you didn't have to do this for me," she said softly. Henry shook his head. I know, but I wanted to. You're doing a lot more than cleaning a barn every day. I wanted to help in some small way. She smiled, a little brighter than usual. Thank you. Appreciate it more than I can say. The barn, once dusty and empty, was now a place of warmth. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating every corner. Tools were in their place, the floor was clean, and the smell of hay no longer seemed forgotten. And yet, it wasn't just the barn that had changed. Something deeper had shifted. For Henry, it was the beginning of understanding. Life wasn't just about work, or routine, or silence. It was about connection, about seeing people, about offering kindness when it was needed most. And for her, it was a quiet reassurance that she wasn't alone, that someone noticed, that someone cared. The children began to notice Henry as well. Lucy would wave from the porch, Sam would ask about the horses, and little Emma and Ben would giggle when he tossed a ball across the yard. Slowly, the household began to feel less heavy, filled with small moments of joy. Henry realized that this woman, who had come to work in his barn without asking for much, had changed him in ways he couldn't have imagined. She had reminded him that life, no matter how quiet or lonely, could still hold beauty, courage, and hope. And as he left that day walking back to his ranch, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. The barn would always be a place to work, to sweep and clean and repair. But now, it was also a symbol of connection, of lives intersecting, and of small acts of kindness that could ripple into something far greater than anyone could imagine. Henry knew, without fully understanding why, that this was only the beginning. The woman, the children, the quiet strength they carried. They had opened a door to something new, something that would change not just his life, but theirs as well. And as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink, Henry stood at the edge of his property and realized that sometimes the people we meet in the simplest of ways can teach us the deepest lessons. Days turn into weeks, and Henry found himself thinking about the woman and her children more often than he expected. It wasn't just concern that drew him. It was curiosity, admiration, and a strange kind of respect. He had never met anyone quite like her before. She carried so much weight quietly, and yet despite the difficulties, she still managed to smile, to laugh, to keep her children's lives filled with small moments of joy. Henry realized that her strength wasn't loud or boastful. It was quiet, steady, and unwavering. One afternoon, as Henry was repairing a broken fence near the barn, he saw her walking along the dirt path toward the ranch, the children trailing behind her. She waved, and the kids waved back eagerly. Henry felt a warmth in his chest. It was strange, the way a simple wave could make him feel lighter, as if the burdens he carried on his own were shared, even in the smallest way. When they arrived, she set down a basket filled with fresh vegetables and bread she had brought from her small garden. The children ran ahead, chasing a loose chicken that had wandered from the yard, giggling and shouting. Henry smiled to himself, watching them. Their laughter filled the open air, a sound that had been absent from his ranch for far too long. "Hello, Henry," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Her voice carried a quiet determination that never wavered, even in the face of exhaustion. "Beck! Hello," he replied, setting aside his hammer. "The kids seem full of energy today." She smiled faintly, a little tired but still proud. "Bet. They are. I can barely keep up with them some days." Henry nodded, thinking about the responsibility she carried. 4 children, all with their own needs, dreams, and fears, and she managed to keep them fed, clothed, and cared for. It was remarkable. He realized that she did this not for praise or recognition, but because she loved them more than anything else in the world. They walked together to the barn, carrying some tools and supplies. The barn was beginning to feel less like a chore and more like a shared space, a place where they could work together side by side. Henry noticed how carefully she moved, handling each item as if it were fragile, treating the barn with a respect that spoke of her attention to detail and her dedication. As they worked, she began to share more about her life. Her voice was soft, but her words painted vivid pictures. She spoke of the struggles she had faced after losing her husband, of the long nights she spent worrying about money and school, of the small victories that made it all worthwhile. Henry listened intently, realizing that every word was a lesson in resilience and courage. "It hasn't been easy," she said, pausing to wipe her brow. "Some days I feel like I'm barely keeping it together. But then I see them, my children, and I know I have to keep going. They need me, and I need to show them that life can still be good, even when it's hard."
Henry felt a lump in his throat.
He had always considered himself strong, capable, and self-reliant, but compared to her, he felt almost inexperienced in the ways of true perseverance. Here was a woman who faced challenges every single day, and yet she never complained, never gave up. Her courage was quiet, but it was immense. As the afternoon wore on, Henry noticed the children returning from their playful chase, tired but happy. Lucy, the eldest, carried a sketchbook she had been working on, showing it to her mother with pride. Sam held a small wooden toy he had carved himself, his concentration evident even in his excitement. Little Emma and Ben clung to their mother's hands, giggling and chattering about everything they had seen. Henry watched them, feeling a mix of admiration and something else, an unexpected tenderness. The children were lively, full of curiosity and energy, and it was clear that their mother had worked tirelessly to nurture that spark in them. He realized that the challenges she faced weren't just about survival. They were about creating a life for her children that was full of hope, learning, and love. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the barn, Henry and the woman sat down for a brief rest. They shared a small piece of bread, and Henry noticed how careful she was, breaking it into pieces for the children, making sure everyone had enough. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about her character, her priorities, and her love. "You really do this every day," Henry said softly, unable to hide his amazement. She smiled, a little wryly. "But it's worth it. It has to be." Henry nodded, understanding more than words could express. He thought about his own life, the quiet solitude he had grown accustomed to, and realized that he had been missing something crucial: connection, empathy, and shared purpose. Here, in this barn, working alongside her and watching her care for her children, he found a sense of meaning he hadn't felt in years. Over the next several days, Henry began to think of ways he could help more. He didn't want to overstep, but he wanted to make life a little easier for her. He started leaving small surprises, extra food, tools, or supplies for the children, always with a note that said nothing more than, "For you with care." She would find them, sometimes a little embarrassed, sometimes quietly grateful, but she never refused or complained. One evening, as Henry was leaving the barn, she called out to him. "Henry!" "Thank you for everything," she said. Her voice carried genuine warmth, and her eyes reflected gratitude that she rarely showed to anyone. Henry shook his head.
"You don't need to thank me. You're doing something far more important than any barn could ever be."
She paused, considering his words. It means a lot, knowing someone cares, even a little." Henry smiled, feeling a rare sense of connection. Sometimes so little is all it takes. As the weeks turned into months, the barn became more than just a workplace. It became a place of shared moments, laughter, and quiet understanding. The children began to come more often, helping with small tasks and learning from Henry in their own way. Lucy started sketching the barn, Sam helped with repairs, and little Emma and Ben learned to care for the animals. Breath. Each child brought energy, life, and warmth to the ranch, and Henry felt a sense of family he hadn't known in years. Through it all, he watched the woman continue to manage her household with grace and determination. She faced challenges with courage, found solutions with patience, and never let the weight of the world crush her spirit. Henry realized that true strength wasn't about muscle or speed. It was about resilience, love, and the quiet choices made every day to keep moving forward. One afternoon, as the sun set and painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, Henry found himself reflecting on everything he had witnessed. The woman and her children had changed his perspective on life. They had reminded him that hardship could coexist with hope, that struggle could coexist with laughter, and that love could shine even in the smallest of gestures. He knew, in that moment, that he would do whatever he could to support them, but because he felt obligated, but because he wanted to. Because he had seen the extraordinary courage in someone who carried the weight of the world quietly, without complaint, and he wanted to be a part of making life just a little easier for them. And as he walked home that evening, the ranch bathed in the soft glow of twilight, Henry felt something he hadn't felt in years. A sense of purpose, connection, and hope for the future. The barn, the house, the children and their mother had all become a part of his life, and he realized that life's true value wasn't measured by solitude or routine, but by the bonds we build, the kindness we offer, and the courage we recognize in others. Weeks passed, and Henry began to realize that the connection he had formed with the woman and her children was growing stronger each day. The barn was no longer just a space for work. It had become a place where lives intertwined, where laughter and determination met. The children had started to visit more often, their curious eyes exploring every corner of the ranch. Lucy would carefully examine the tools Henry used, asking questions about each one. Best. Sam liked to watch the horses, learning to feed and groom them under Henry's patient guidance. Little Emma and Ben ran through the fields, chasing butterflies and trying to keep up with each other, their laughter echoing across the hills. Henry noticed how the woman's demeanor began to soften around him. She still carried the weight of her responsibilities, of course, but she seemed less burdened. She had learned to trust that he wouldn't judge or interfere, only to help when needed. Slowly, she shared more about her daily struggles, how hard it was to balance work with her children's school needs, how the bills often piled up faster than she could manage, and how exhausting it was to maintain a semblance of normalcy for the children. One afternoon, as the sun shone warmly across the fields, Henry suggested they work together on a new project. "I've been thinking," he said, brushing dust off his hands. "The barn is almost perfect, but the fence along the northern pasture is falling apart. Maybe we can fix it together. Bear. You, me, and the kids." The woman looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "Bet. That's a lot of work." Henry smiled. "I think we can manage if we all help." "And it will be fun." Brace. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, let's do it." The next morning, Henry arrived at her house carrying supplies for the fence repair. The children were already awake and full of energy, eager to help. Lucy carried a small toolbox she had borrowed from the barn. Sam held the nails and hammer while Emma and Ben bounced with excitement, ready to run errands or pass tools when needed. Henry felt a warmth spread through him. The scene reminded him of a family working together, a unit bound by shared effort and purpose. It wasn't just about fixing a fence, it was about building trust, teaching responsibility and sharing life's simple joys. As they worked, Henry noticed how naturally the woman managed the children. She directed them with patience, explaining how to handle tools safely, guiding Lucy when she struggled to hammer a nail straight, and praising Sam for carefully measuring the posts. The younger children, Emma and Ben, were given small, safe tasks, like gathering sticks or holding the ends of a rope. It was clear she had been doing this for years, balancing discipline and encouragement with a gentle hand. Brask. Henry, in turn, found himself learning from her approach. He had always been used to managing tasks alone, giving orders without much explanation. But here he saw the value of guidance, patience, and teamwork. P. began to engage more with the children, showing them tricks for tying knots, how to steady a hammer, and how to listen to instructions carefully. Slowly, a sense of camaraderie formed, a bond that felt natural and right. As the day wore on, sweat and dust covering their clothes, they took breaks under the shade of an old oak tree. The children shared small snacks, and the woman poured water for everyone, making sure no one went thirsty. Henry watched her quietly, marveling at her strength. She worked tirelessly, balancing her own energy with the needs of her children, never letting frustration show. There was a quiet dignity in her determination, a resilience that left a lasting impression on him. "Henry," she said softly during a break, "I don't know how to thank you for all of this. You've done so much, and I don't know what I would do without your help." Bass. Henry shook his head. "You don't need to thank me." Bast. "I just want to help. That's all." She smiled, but her eyes reflected a depth of gratitude that words could not fully express. Henry felt a lump in his throat. He realized that this wasn't just about work or kindness. It was about trust, about showing someone that they weren't alone in the world. By evening, the fence was repaired. It wasn't perfect, but it stood strong, a testament to teamwork, perseverance, and determination. The children ran along the newly fixed boundary, their laughter ringing in the air. The woman stood beside Henry, watching them with pride and a hint of relief. "You know," Henry said, "they're amazing kids. You've done an incredible job raising them." She looked at him, a little shyly, and nodded. "Bear. It hasn't been easy. Some days I wonder if I'm doing enough. But moments like this, they remind me why I keep going." Henry realized that she had been teaching her children more than academics or chores. She had been teaching them resilience, kindness, and the value of hard work. He felt honored to witness it and grateful to be a small part of their lives. In the following weeks, their routine grew more comfortable. Henry often stopped by to help with household repairs, bringing supplies or lending a hand. The woman, in turn, began to trust him more, sharing small details of their daily lives. They laughed together, exchanged stories, and found comfort in each other's presence. The children, too, grew more comfortable with Henry, treating him as a trusted friend and guide. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled in. Dark clouds filled the sky, and rain poured down in heavy sheets. Henry was at the ranch when he saw the weather change, and he knew he had to check on them. He grabbed his coat and ran to her house, arriving just as the wind began to shake the trees. When he knocked, she opened the door, drenched but smiling. The children were huddled inside, shivering but safe. "I'm glad you came," she said, wrapping a towel around herself. The rain came out of nowhere. Henry stepped inside, helping dry off the children and making sure they were warm. He realized how vulnerable their life could be, how easily circumstances could disrupt their fragile stability. And yet, despite the fear and exhaustion, they faced it together as a unit, finding safety and comfort in shared effort and care. After the storm passed, Henry walked home reflecting on the day. he realized that life with them was not just about helping. They were teaching him as much as he was teaching them. He learned about resilience, patience, and the quiet joy of being part of someone else's world. He understood that true connection required effort, empathy, and trust, and that the bonds formed through shared experience were stronger than any obstacle life could present. The days turned into months, and Henry noticed subtle changes. The woman smiled more often, less burdened by the weight of her responsibilities. The children thrived, learning from both their mother and Henry. The barn and ranch were no longer just places of work. They were places of laughter, learning, and growth. Henry also realized that his own life had changed. The loneliness that had once defined his existence had been replaced by purpose, connection, and the quiet satisfaction of helping others. He had come to understand that family could take many forms, not just through blood, but through shared effort, care, and mutual respect. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of gold and pink, Henry sat on the porch, watching the woman and her children play in the yard. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Their lives had intertwined in a way that was unexpected, yet perfect. He knew there would be challenges ahead, but he also knew that together they could face anything. And as the stars began to appear in the night sky, Henry felt a quiet certainty. This was more than friendship, more than simple kindness. It was a new beginning, a chance to build something lasting, meaningful, and beautiful. The barn, the ranch, the home. They were no longer just spaces. They were symbols of resilience, trust, and the power of connection. The days grew longer, and the seasons slowly changed, bringing new challenges and small joys to the ranch. Henry had learned to wake each morning with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He no longer felt alone in his life because the woman and her children had become an important part of his world. The barn, which had once been just a dusty, lonely space, now buzzed with energy, laughter, and life. The fences stood strong, the tools were well kept, and the air carried the sound of children's voices chasing chickens and laughing at small, silly games. One morning, Henry noticed the woman looking tired, more than usual. She had been working late the previous night, helping Lucy finish a school project and preparing Sam for a small local competition. Even with the help she received from Henry, the weight of her responsibility seemed heavier that day. Henry realized that he couldn't just watch from the sidelines anymore. He had to step in a bigger way, offering more than just small assistance or advice. Later that day, he went to her house with a plan. He knocked, and when she opened the door, she was surprised to see him standing there, holding a set of keys. Henry, what are these for? She asked, her curiosity mixed with caution. He smiled. I've been thinking. You and the children need a safe place to stay. A place where you don't have to worry about moving or rent or repairs all the time. I want to offer you a small house on my property. You can stay as long as you need, and we'll figure out the rest together. Her eyes widened. For a moment, she didn't speak. Henry could see the mixture of disbelief and hope in her expression. Henry, I don't know what to say. I can't believe it. You don't have to say anything, Henry replied gently. Just know that you're welcome here. I've seen how hard you work, and I know how much love you give your children.
You deserve a safe place to call home. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back, afraid to show too much emotion. Thank you.
I don't know how to ever repay you.
Henry shook his head. You don't need to.
Seeing you and the children safe and happy is more than enough. That evening, They moved the few belongings she had to the small house on Henry's property. The children were excited beyond words, exploring their new rooms, laughing as they discovered the space for the first time. Lucy immediately claimed a corner for her books and sketches. Sam set up a small area for his wooden crafts, and Emma and Ben giggled while running around the yard chasing each other in endless circles. Henry watched them, his heart full. The ranch, which had once been a quiet, lonely place, was now alive with life. He realized that what had started as a simple job, a woman cleaning his barn, had transformed into something far greater. It had become a shared life, a community built on kindness, trust, and mutual respect. The weeks that followed were full of small, beautiful moments. Henry taught the children to care for the animals properly, showing them how to feed the horses, gather eggs, and tend to the smaller livestock. The woman guided them in their studies, helping with homework, reading stories aloud, and encouraging them to explore their interests. Together they worked in the barn, repaired fences, and even started a small garden to grow vegetables and herbs. Every day brought new lessons, laughter, and a sense of togetherness that had been missing from all their lives. One afternoon, as the sun cast golden light across the fields, Henry sat on the porch with the woman. The children were playing nearby, their laughter carrying on the breeze. For the first time, she allowed herself to relax completely, leaning back in her chair with a quiet smile. "I never imagined life could be like this," she said softly. "After all the hardships, all the worry, I thought it would always be difficult. But now, it feels like we have a chance to breathe, to enjoy life."
Henry nodded, understanding.
Life is hard sometimes, but we also have the power to make it better, little by little. You've taught me that more than anyone else ever could. She looked at him, a little surprised by the honesty. Me? Yes, Henry replied. Your strength, your courage, the way you love your children, it's inspiring. I've learned more from you in these months than I have in years of living alone. She smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile, and for a moment the weight of the world seemed to lift from her shoulders. Henry realized that disconnection, the trust, friendship, and shared effort had transformed both their lives. As the weeks turned into months, the family began to feel truly settled. The children excelled in school, helped with chores, and thrived in the safety and stability of their new home. Lucy's drawings became more detailed and confident. Sam's small crafts grew more intricate. And even little Emma and Ben learned the value of teamwork and responsibility through play. Henry marveled at how quickly the children adapted and how resilient they were, despite all they had faced in the past. The woman, too, grew stronger. She laughed more freely, smiled without hesitation, and allowed herself to accept help when needed. She had learned that strength wasn't about handling everything alone. It was about accepting kindness and support when offered, and about sharing life's burdens with those who genuinely cared. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, casting long shadows across the ranch, Henry and the woman stood together, watching the children play. The air was filled with laughter, the soft sounds of animals, and the quiet hum of a peaceful life. Henry felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He realized that life had a way of bringing people together in unexpected ways, and that even small acts of kindness could create lasting change. "But, you know," he said softly, "I never thought a barn cleaning job would lead to this." She chuckled, shaking her head. "It's funny how life works sometimes." Henry smiled. "Funny, yes, but also wonderful." The woman looked at him, her eyes reflecting gratitude and warmth. "Yes, wonderful." Because of you, Henry, because of your kindness, we have a chance to start fresh." Henry felt a lump in his throat. He had never expected to play such an important role in someone else's life, but he realized that helping them had changed him too. He was no longer the lonely rancher, isolated and quiet. He had become part of a family, even if it wasn't his by blood. The bond they shared was real, built on trust, respect, and shared experiences. The days continued, filled with work, play, learning, and small celebrations. Round and desperate, Henry watched the children grow, guiding them, laughing with them, and sometimes simply enjoying the quiet moments when they were all together. The woman found joy in knowing that her children were safe, happy, and thriving, and Henry found joy in seeing their lives flourish. One winter evening, as the first snow fell gently across the ranch, Henry and the woman sat by the fire, the children asleep upstairs. They shared stories, dreams, and reflections on the journey that had brought them together. Henry realized that what had begun as a simple act, a woman cleaning his barn, had become a life-changing connection, one that would stay with him forever. He turned to her and said quietly, "We've come a long way, from that first day in the barn to now. I think we've built something truly special." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Yes, we have." "And I'm so grateful for you, Henry, for everything." Henry smiled, feeling a profound sense of peace. "It was meant to be," he said softly. "Sometimes life brings people together in ways we can't predict, but when it does, it's magical, best." And as the snow fell outside, blanketing the ranch in a quiet, shimmering white, Henry realized that their lives had changed forever. The barn, once dusty and lonely, had brought them together. The ranch, once silent and empty, was now alive with laughter, love, and hope. And the woman and her children, once carrying their burdens alone, had found a place to belong, a place to grow, and a place to call home. Henry knew that life would still bring challenges, but he also knew that together they could face anything. They had created a family, not through blood, but through trust, care, and shared experience. They had turned hardship into hope, struggle into resilience, and loneliness into connection.